Good afternoon. We'd like to call to order the November 2015 City of Columbia Planning Commission meeting. I'd like to welcome all our Planning Commission members, staff, and guests. I would ask that everyone turn their cell phones and PDAs to the silent or vibrate mode. The clerk will now proceed with the roll call.
Mr. Cohn,
Here.
Mr. Dinkins,
Here.
Ms. Foster, Ms. James,
Here.
Mr. McDuffie,
Here.
Mr. Stern,
Here.
Mr. Stigmeyer,
Here.
Mr. Taylor's not here, and Mr. Waits.
Here.
We have quorum.
Thank you. I'd like to briefly review the meeting format. Applicants with requests before the Planning Commission are allotted a presentation time of 10 minutes. This time should include, but is not limited to, an overview of the project, case history, and any pertinent meetings held regarding the request. This time also includes all persons presenting information on behalf of the applicant, such as attorneys, engineers, and architects. This time limit does not include any questions asked by the Planning Commission or staff regarding requests. Members of the general public are given the opportunity to address their concerns in intervals of 2 minutes. The clerk has a timer and will make presenters aware of when their time has expired. The Planning Commission reserves the right to amend these procedures on a case-by-case basis. The consent agenda. The Planning Commission uses the consent agenda to approve non-controversial or routine matters by a single motion and vote. Examples of such items include approval of site plans, annexations, and street names. If a member of the Planning Commission or the general public would like to discuss an item on the consent agenda, then that item is removed from the consent agenda and considered during the meeting. The Planning Commission then approves the remaining consent agenda items. The clerk will now read the consent agenda.
Before I read the consent agenda, we just have one recommendation for a change to the agenda this evening. All the items do stand as they were published. However, on item number 11, staff is going to be recommending that this particular item be deferred until the next month, and so staff recommends maybe if there's people here in the audience for number 11, that item be moved forward so you can take action on that so they don't have to wait through all the other items for a motion to defer to the December meeting.
So you want to defer it for tonight?
That's our recommendation, if you would like to consider that. And then we can move on to the consent agenda.
All right, is there anyone on the commission who would oppose that? Can I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor of deferring?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? The item number 11 will be deferred to the next meeting.
Great, thank you. The consent agenda consists of the approval of the September 14th, 2015 minutes. Item number 2, which is 1750 Andrews Road, which is a annexation, comprehensive plan map amendment, and zoning map amendment. And item number 3, which is 3807 Capers Avenue, which is also an annexation with amendment to the zoning and comp plan. And then 7316, 7320, 7324, and 7340 Garner's Ferry Road, which is all of one tax map number, is also an annexation with comprehensive plan map amendment and zoning map amendment, as well as a site plan for Kinder Boulevard, which consists of a single-family residential subdivision. And on your opposite page of your agenda, 5350 Randall Avenue, which is also a site plan approval for an 8-unit apartment building and 1 community building.
Okay, are there any commission members or guests today who wish to have the items on the consent agenda removed and placed on the regular agenda? Okay. Can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Consent agenda is approved. We will now proceed with the regular agenda.
Good evening. That'll bring us to the site plan review at Belmont Drive, extension TMS number 13907-03313234, 13907-01-09 a portion. And this is a request for approval to extend Belmont Drive. The properties are zoned RS1 and within the floodplain overlay. This project entails the extension of Belmont Drive to develop 34-lot single-family residential subdivision on 28.7 acres that is primarily located within Forest Acres. The site plan illustrates that the extension of Belmont Drive will be privately maintained and it will also be gated in accordance with the applicable codes. The request before the commission is because the extension of Belmont Drive, which classifies a major subdivision in conformance with section 17-464 of the City of Columbia zoning ordinance. The Planning Commission review is only for the portion of the property that is located within the City of Columbia and is technical in nature. The project, as far as Forest Acres goes, has received sketch plan approval by staff that occurred on July the 30th, 2015. The site plan generally meets staff comments. A lot of the comments in the case report are standard. From the planning perspective, there was some discussion about the roads being constructed to meet all street requirements as far as curb and gutter, planting strips, sidewalks, and all other city engineering standards. With the land development perspective, lots 15, 16, and 17, if they're constructed, should not span that municipal boundary, cannot be located between the jurisdictions. From a stormwater standpoint, land disturbance permitting to be provided by Richland County and/or Forest Acres for the entire project, as well as city land disturbance requirements to be met for the portion of the property that's located within the city. Floodplain manager has also reviewed the request and requires that manholes be required to meet floodplain requirements. There are a lot of emails that have been distributed to you, but at this time we'd like to put those on the record. First of all, we have an email of opposition from Deborah Drochter of 3406 Brookwood Court, as well as there's an email from Ms. Drochter regarding a floodplain delineation. You have both of those emails. There's an email of opposition from Christy Elwell of 3905 Trenham Road, and an email of opposition from Lisa Fouché of 44 Mahalo Lane, as well as an email of opposition from Mary Jane and Patrick Scott. And at this time, I can turn it over to the applicant to present their case.
Please state your name.
Thank you. Mitch McWhirter, H&M Realty, one of the members. Thank you, Jonathan, for that summary. Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, I appreciate your time today. Jonathan covered most of the stuff that we would discuss, but just as in history, we acquired this property sometime, mid-2014. Went through a number of iterations about what we wanted to try to do with it, looked at a couple of commercial applications, and when it was all said and done, some of those applications were met with some resistance. There was a lot of discussion with the site plan itself being, again, a majority in Forest Acres, but what exactly we could do with it. There was discussion of 100+ lots, 70 lots, a couple of commercial uses encompassing 10. When it was all said and done, we as a development group decided to decrease that, look at a development that would be more contiguous with Tanglewood as a complement to it, and the adjoining properties an extension of the existing zoning to residential. We reduced the lot count down to 34 when we had an opportunity to go a little bit higher. Today, when we look at what we're trying to accomplish, is we're looking, because of the 3 lots that are at the end of Belmont, they are in the City of Columbia. The extension of Belmont, which this request is to give us another access point into the subdivision. There is also an access point within Sunnyside Drive. We will gate this community to reduce the traffic flow that comes in and out. I know it's a concern with some flooding potential, and when it's all said and done, our site plan has been reviewed by Forest Acres. It does not request any zoning variances or any changes with the existing code. We'll follow the P1. We'll follow the existing code within the City of Columbia's, RS1 and RG1 where we are. So, and again, in short and summary, we're going to follow a guideline within the existing zoning parameters and try to look to extend this to allow a better flow of traffic into a very private gated community of 34 residential properties.
I notice in some of the opposition letters, they seem to be asking about addressing a flooding problem and also a buffer. Have you all addressed any of those issues?
You want to speak to the buffer?
Yes, sir. Good evening. My name is Mike Brickle. I'm also with H&M. The buffering requirements are being enforced through Richland County and through the City of Forest Acres, and those buffering requirements will be met per their code and enforcement. With any water retention or the flood control methodology, that'll be done upon our final engineering, and it'll also be presented to both the municipality, Richland County, and whatever DHEC jurisdictional requirements they have. So we fully intend to meet whatever obligations we have, and we're aware of them.
Any of our commissioners have any questions for the applicant? Any questions for staff?
Jonathan, please help clarify us a little bit. I just want to make sure everyone understands exactly what we're doing here, because Rick brings up a good point. Some of the opposition emails discuss details specific to the development itself, and I just want to make sure that everyone is on the same page. So we are asked to only review the portion within the city, which would be the extension of the roadway.
That is correct.
So whether there's flooding issues or buffer issues, anything like that, while that's important, it's not our job here today. So I just want to make sure we all realize that.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Have a good
Thank you.
evening. Thank you for your time.
Are there any other guests that would like to speak on this?
My name is Deborah Droder, and I am the author of one of those emails that you are looking at, and I also speak for a huge neighborhood group that surrounds this, and we're a little surprised that we're even standing here talking to you about this road being permitted and where it goes into flooding. And if you could go into the folder that says neighbors concerned, you need to go up to folders. I think they're looking at my disk as we get that. But you have a map to you, and in the permit request, they did look through the floodplain map, but that is the 2010 floodplain map. The copy that I have given to you is 2010, and we can actually pull, if we have the time, we can pull up that, it should be neighbors concerned. You're in the wrong file, I'm sorry. Neighbors concerned. And please don't let this count keep going down. I teach school, there's a lot of files. That's just one of many. I don't. No, neighbors concerned. Neighborhood concerns, there we go. And if we can look at your video folder, and I'll pull that up in just a minute, but the flood map that you're looking at is 2015. And it now redefines the floodway, and I've blown that up, and that floodway, you made the reference, this doesn't include flooded, but you're building a road into a land that floods routinely, not historically. You've got their map up. Yeah, no, we can, I'm not sure where you are. Okay. Okay, if you just go ahead and show the video. And this is a video of where they're building. You've had all your people stamp and approve this, but this is that road. Now, this occurred after the historic flood that day at 3:20 when the water had receded. It was over 10 feet deep in that area. It came up to Buchanan, which is hundreds of feet away from there, flooding the home at Buchanan and Belmont 10 feet, 5 feet up to its floorboards and that. But prior to this historic flood on 9/21, we had a flood on that evening, 3 to 4 inches of rain in 1 hour that brought 4 feet of flood. And I do have that picture that I can show you. Mrs. Garvin was to have been here tonight, and she emailed me at the last minute telling me she wasn't here. That flood, can I show these pictures? That flood, this is water, that evening at 9 o'clock. And then the next day showing where a flood of 3 to 4 inches of water moved a trash container several dozen feet away from its place, its sitting. So flooding is routine here. It's not historic, it's not that. And again, the flood map that is 2015 is the current map that's being drawn, and that has the road now in a floodway, no longer a floodplain, and that is what I blew up for you, and I have copies if you need to see those, where it's changing. And it's changing again. We had the geological surveys all around our neighborhoods the week after the flood. And with my tax fee, I am a resident of Forest Acres, but I pay the tax fee to Richland County. I really do not think money is well spent to build into road that routinely floods.
Is this where they want to put the road? Is that what you're?
That's where
telling
they're,
us?
if I can get the video, I can show you the road. It says video of, yeah, video of Belmont, right there. Right at the top, video of Belmont. This is Belmont. This is where they're building. You can. This was taken by Harry's Les Ross. If you just pull up, you can see the picture. That's actually the road, and it stops for a reason. I think the picture suffices.
I think we've seen the road now.
Okay. But again, my concern is what flood map was used to make the determination by your department officials. Was it 2010 or the more current of 2015, which isn't a draft, but it has gone through one preliminary evaluation? And according to an attorney I spoke to today, Mullen Taylor, she said that would be the one that should have been used. And if it's used, the road is in a flood way.
Mr. Chairman, and I'm sensitive
Mhm.
to Belmont. In fact, I had my parents and my sister were both flooded out in Burrow Lane, and my sister lost her house completely. So I'm sensitive to that. But as far as what you said, Gene, getting back to what we're being asked to evaluate and recommend, is based on the planning. It's not based on the engineering. And ultimately, whether or not the road can or can't be built will be determined, or should be determined, by the city of engineers, who are taking all of that information into account.
Which map did they use and prior to October the 4th?
But that's not our jurisdiction. We're just asked to provide some planning, for planning purposes, you know, our recommendation for the road itself. If the engineers, city engineers, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jonathan, I know y'all get into this in planning, but if the city engineers determine that it's not feasible or it's not practical given the revised floodplain maps, then it won't be built. I mean, it's just, so that'll be something that the engineers, the city engineers will determine and go from there. If I'm not
That is
mistaken.
correct with their review, and
That's
the floodplain manager has looked at the proposal And again, his concerns was that the manholes meet floodplain requirements, FEMA requirements.
How do you put manholes in Zone AE? I live on the other side of that creek. The only runoff is the creek. There's no place to put a manhole.
Well,
That's it.
that's
That would
for
be it.
engineering, though, to
Okay.
determine. That, we're the planning commission.
And do they go look at this land, or do they just rubber stamp it?
Well, they're going to look at the engineered plans, and they'll look at the site plans along with the maps, and they'll take all that data, and then they'll do their review based upon calculations and that kind of thing. But what they'll do is, again, part of the property is located within Forest Acres, and then part of it's located within the city. And so both jurisdictions will review the proposals.
And if I'm not mistaken, we're only approving a plan subject to engineering and other items we have no jurisdiction or control over.
But once you approve this plan, it now goes back to Forest Acres. Forest Acres just approved a sketch. If the sketch is given, they say it's good, now we go. And so one thing keeps letting the thing keep going forward.
It's out of our jurisdiction.
Okay.
Any other questions? Are there any other thank you. Are there any other guests who would like to come forward?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. I'm Toby Ward. I'm an attorney here in Columbia. I'm speaking tonight on behalf of Lisa Fouché, who is enjoying much better weather conditions than we are. Ms. Fouché is a neighboring landowner. She lives in the Tanglewood subdivision. Her property backs up to the stream that has its passage point from the area you see that's greenish aquamarine underneath Beltline Boulevard. Her home is in that general area, and she experienced some flooding in the recent flood that we all are aware of. I'm here today for two reasons. Number one, if you vote to move this forward by giving this project your recommendation, I think it should be with strict enforcement of each and every condition that was recommended by your staff. Second of all, I think that I'm assuming staff has looked at the June 2015 ordinances that appear at 21-171 and following sections. Again, they were enacted by City Council in June of this year, almost coincidentally just before the flood, and those have much stricter provisions relating to development in flood-prone areas, which I think we all know from living in the city of Columbia, that end of Belmont is a flood-prone area. I hope that staff reviewed those provisions when they came up with their recommendations. They're pretty extensive, and while they might at first blush seem to address mostly to finished floor space concerns, if you look at 21-172-5, it talks about floodways located within areas of special flood hazard, and it talks about encroachments are prohibited, including fill, new construction, substantial improvements, and other development unless certification by a professional engineer is provided, the so-called no-rise certification. I don't know if this was considered by staff. If it wasn't, I hope before council votes on it that it will be. Those are my comments, and I thank you for your time. I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions, Mr. Ward? Staff, any comments to the questions brought up by the applicant or by Mr. Ward on the reviews?
The city floodplain manager has reviewed the plan. The city stormwater engineer has reviewed the plan. The city's utility engineer has reviewed the plans. So the plans have been reviewed and approved by, looked at per engineering. If the commission were to grant approval, it would move forward to, the applicant would be required to submit additional plans prior to permitting. This project will not go to city council, and in that it's just a site plan review, and technical in nature.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Then I'd like to ask for a motion, please.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion that we approve the request for site plan approval for the extension of Belmont Drive.
Second.
Any
Mr.
further discussion?
I'd just simply like to add that we're sensitive to all of the neighbors and the residents concerned, but when it boils down to our city floodplain coordinator and the rest of the engineering staff have approved this matter, that's, in my opinion, out of our jurisdiction here, so.
And is that with staff comments?
Yes,
Mr.
yes,
Deacons?
please, thank you for pointing out, subject to staff comments, absolutely.
Okay, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Nay.
Motion passes. Next item.
The next item is for Canal Side. It's 1511 Williams Street, 600 Canal Side, 610 Depot Street, 625 Williams, 463 McDougal, 485 McDougal, the north-south intersection of Irwin Park Circle, the east-south intersection of Irwin Park Circle, 361 Taylor Street, 635 Taylor Street, 535 Depot Street, and 645 Canal Street, to request a major amendment to the Canal Side PUD / DD, and also, very similar set of numbers, the request to rezone C1 to DD Office and Institutional with the PUD C DD overlay district. And Mr. Cook is here and will explain the your packet.
I think John pretty well covered it. It's just a major amendment. The major amendment takes in all of the plan unit development. The revised Canal Side plan unit development document has been provided for you. It's this document that looks like this, and it is amended to reflect the changes that are being proposed today. The applicant is here and can explain and answer any questions that you may have.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. My name is Ryan Heiler. I'm with Land Holdings 2 LLC, which is one of Don Tomlin's entities, and I'm here representing the Canal Beach Company on the Canal Side amendment. The major component of this amendment is to bring in a group of 11 parcels, which you'll see here on the right-hand side, to build a climate-controlled, state-of-the-art self-storage facility. And we believe this is a great amenity for downtown Columbia. As we try to urbanize our city and bring more and more apartment dwellers into the city, we are starting to see that there's a huge need for climate-controlled storage, both through people downsizing and moving into apartments and for recreational storage. So we intend to build a facility that will house family antiques, things like that, but also have space for kayaks, canoes, mountain bikes, so that on a Saturday afternoon, you can go pick up your kayak from the storage building and go down to the river and jump in. I'm going to talk a little bit about the site-specific. Dan, would you mind? So this is an odd site. It's got very little frontage on UG Street. The majority of the frontage is actually on Hampton, Jarvis Clapman coming across the river, and then down on Williams Street. But it's one way on 3 sides, and you have as many as up to 7 lanes of traffic. So we believe for the long-term development of this site, it's going to be very difficult to get any high-traffic retail office user on this site. That's why we believe that storage will be a great addition to the Vista here, because it's counter-cyclical to the normal 9 to 5 office traffic. Most of the folks that will be using this will be nights and weekends. The other thing is we've met with the DOT, and they will only allow us access in and out of the site down on Williams Street. So given the fact that you have to circle the block all the way around to access the site, we don't believe that high-density office or retail is a viable long-term option. The other thing to point out is by right, storage is actually allowed in a vast majority of the Vista. And this site in the bottom corner here is just on the edge of that boundary. But we believe that this is in keeping with the neighborhood and what's traditionally allowed in the Vista, just extending this slightly over onto this other parcel. The last thing that I'd like to talk about is the facility itself. As I mentioned, we intend on building a state-of-the-art facility. We have its staff's recommendations included in your amendment, the materials that will be used for construction. It will include hard stucco, a lot of exterior glass, brick. I'm actually going to pass these renderings down. So we believe that we are building a very attractive building that will be highly visible as you come across the bridge. And it will be a facility that we think will be unsurpassed in Columbia. With that said, we take this extremely seriously. We have met with many of the neighboring property owners, to include Baker & Baker, who own the Aflac and AT&T buildings. They are in support. The Beach Company, who has several hundred apartments next door, views this as an amenity to their development. And United Community Bank, who owns the office building on this block, is also supportive of the project.
How many units are you all proposing?
It'll be roughly 550.
Can we go back, there was a drawing of, it was just blank, it was a few minutes ago, William Street and that one.
Yeah.
Where exactly is it planned?
So actually, yeah. So the facility will be fronting. Yeah. So the facility will be fronting up to the street, both on Williams and Hampton Street. Craig, if you'll flip to the other rendering, that is the corner view right there. So you can see on the left-hand side, this side of Canal Side, you can kind of see on the left side of the rendering.
So you're going up 3 stories, is that correct?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
What's the height of the proposed building?
Not to exceed 50 feet.
Was this property always on the C1, or did it had a zoning change? You know, because back when Columbia Lumber and some
Yep.
of that was there,
We believe it's always been C1 as far as,
always been
yeah.
C1.
I have a question for staff. Does this fall within the West Gervais Historic District or not? Is that south of this?
No, the West Gervais Historic District stops about Publix, and then it doesn't really extend much beyond Lady Street, so
Okay.
you're a number of blocks away.
Okay.
Any other questions for the applicant right now?
Yeah, just expand, just briefly on the rendering where you said that a storage facility was allowed by right in the area.
Yeah.
I'm not sure myself what that means.
So by current zoning classification, either through M1, M2, or C3, this entire expansive yellow area is currently, so we would be allowed by right to do that as it is currently zoned. So we believe that we're in keeping with what falls within current guidelines.
If this wasn't an attempt to tack it onto the
Correct,
HUD that you
correct,
wrote
yeah, correct.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions for staff or the applicant right now? Thank you. I'm sure we have more speakers today. Are there any other guests who would like to come speak?
Good afternoon. I'm Dale Marshall, and I'm here representing the Congaree Vista Guild. The Guild did receive drawings from the applicant and looked over them, and when the project came up for a PUD revision, we discussed it at our development committee meeting and at the board of the Guild and decided that we wanted to show up in opposition to the project on several grounds. One, we feel like this is an attempt to bootstrap onto the existing PUD with a use that is not consistent with the Canal Side PUD. The Canal Side PUD is a mixed-use development primarily focused on residential and some commercial uses. It doesn't have a storage component. This site, if you travel, is disconnected from Canal Side by basically a 4-lane interstate. For all practical purposes, Taylor and Hampton form an interstate going out of town, and so it's not really possible to take advantage of the parking and other things that are in the Canal Side site, which is what this applicant is attempting to do because they're not meeting the parking requirements for the building on their site. The only way they're achieving that is by tying into the Canal Side PUD. So we don't feel that it's a consistent use of the Canal Side PUD to expand diagonally across the street. We are concerned that on this gateway location, this is one of the primary ways into the Vista, putting a climate control storage warehouse, even one that's relatively tastefully done, still is a dead occupancy and not what we think is an appropriate use in terms of the long-term plans for a gateway site into the Vista. There are other sites in the Vista that are far less prominent that might be a more appropriate use for this type of use, but this is not an appropriate use, and it's not a site that's currently zoned for this use. And so we would like to oppose it on those two grounds primarily, that it's not consistent with the gateway, and it's not a consistent, it's sort of a spot zoning change, and it's not consistent with what we see as the long-term development standards. And if this project gets developed on the site, then it largely precludes this block being developed for something else. So it becomes a question of if we allow this to happen, then we basically are accepting that this is what we'll have for the next 30 to 40 years on this site, and it will preclude expanding a mixed-use development more like Canal Side and connecting the riverfront up into the remainder of the neighborhood. So we'll end up with a block with a largely dead occupancy blocking the riverfront from connecting. And so all the work that is going into developing Canal Side largely will not be able to connect through into the rest of the Vista as things develop. So again, I'm representing the Congaree Vista Guild board, and we have voted to oppose the project on those grounds. I'd be happy to take any questions that you have.
Any questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have any other guests who would like to come up and speak?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. I'm back again. I'm here tonight on behalf of Mike Kelly. Mr. Kelly owns the building that's to the right in the photograph, and he opposes this project on the same grounds that the Vista Guild spoke to. I, however, being a lawyer, have a couple other legal problems that I see that I want to point out to the Planning Commission, and this one I think does go forward to the City Council for ultimate approval. The first problem I see with this project is that under 17-134, this request to rezone is not coming from the City Council or the Planning Commission. Rather, it is coming from an individual or a corporation. 17-134 says that if you have less than 2 acres of property involved, only City Council or the Planning Commission can initiate a zoning change. That's to prevent spot zoning unless there's a good reason for it. As I understand it, staff has elected to interpret the ordinance to say that that is not the case with this piece of property. Rather than put words in their mouth, I'll let them explain to you their reasoning. But 17-134 does say that only city council or a planning commission can initiate a zoning change when less than 2 acres are involved. If that was to happen, that is, city council or planning commission was to initiate this change for this piece of property, then that would invoke 17-134-4, which would be creation of a new PUD, and that's what would be before you. This effort to tack on a PUD designation to a non-PUD piece of property, I think violates the letter, if not the spirit, of 17-134. If you overlook those concerns, I think that you would also look at 17-305, which says that PUDs of less than 2 acres must be endorsed by 2/3 of the total members of the Planning Commission. So I think they'll need a supermajority from this Planning Commission before it can even go to council. And again, that's a requirement of 17-305. And finally, I think I agree with the comments of the Guild. These properties not being contiguous, tacking them on is a real problem, and I don't know that that's a good precedent that this commission wants to invoke with a piece of property that's less than 2 acres. This, presents a lot of opportunity for mischief with people like me. So those are my comments. I hope that you will take them to heart, and I'm happy to answer any questions anyone may have.
Any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you. I have a couple questions for staff. We've just heard from Mr. Ward about several 17.134. Can you address those to us?
Certainly. 17-134 is basically the section you would go to see there were criteria in place that would permit a rezoning of a property. 17-134-1 would say the extension of an existing district boundary would permit a rezoning. Right across the William Street is a PUD zoning. Adjacent to that is the parcel we're talking about. So one could argue that 17-134-1 on itself could stand as being reasonable. We talked about 17-134-4, which talked about the creation of a PUD or a PUD C district as outlined in 17-305. 17-305 is the section that talks about planned unit developments. When we talk about a major change to a planned unit development, we're talking about a nearly 25-acre existing PUD that we're adding some land area to, and because we're changing the boundary of that PUD, it follows the same criteria as if you were establishing a new PUD. So the entire PUD, in essence, 24 existing plus or minus acres, and you're adding nearly 2 acres, or a little less than 2 acres, to the existing PUD. So in fact, the entire planned unit development is being amended as opposed to the strict rezoning of 1.86 acres that is currently zoned C1 now. Additionally, the 17-304 section about the less than 2 acres requiring endorsement of 2/3 of the total members of the Planning Commission, generally that section 17-305B1 is speaking to permitted principal uses and structures for various sites within a PUD. For example, if you have less than 2 acres and you have a PUD R or a PUD C, your uses would be limited to the uses that would be allowed in the PUD R of RG2 and the PUD C of C1, C2, and C3. So it deals specifically with permitted principal uses and structures for various site sizes and types within that PUD that you're creating. So staff feels confident that this PUD can stand on the merits, and we have no concern moving it forward to City Council.
Thank you, Brian. Are there any other guests who would like to come forward?
My name's Mary Langston, and I'm a resident of the Vista. I live just below Publix, but that is still considered the Vista. And as a neighborhood, we're just one of the neighborhoods down there. We do not want anything like this there. As a neighbor in the city and the county paying a lot of money in taxes, we'd also like to see something come in there that's going to help with the tax situation, as I'm sure the city and the county would like also. 550 units sounds like a lot of units to me, and I can't imagine where everybody's going to put all their things. There are plenty of other areas further out from the city that people could use, you know, for that kind of storage, as opposed to businesses or other residents that are going to live there. We're also considered the arts district, and this certainly is not anything having to do with the arts. That does not necessarily mean that the only thing in there are arts, as we all know, but this is, like we said, it's the entryway to the Vista, and it's not exactly something that's very pleasing or welcomed. Of the people that were asked, there were other commercial businesses that aren't there all the time. We live there 24/7. We love the Vista, and we really would like the neighborhood to be considered more in these kind of construction ideas that are coming up. I think that was it. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to come forward?
My name is Steve Henson, and I'm a resident of the Vista and also a member of the Vista Neighborhood Association Development Committee. I just want to make a few comments. You know, I read recently that and we live at Pulaski and Lady, but things in the newspaper talking about the Vista development moving downhill, saying at one time, you know, where the Starbucks was considered way down the hill toward the river, and now you got the city market there. The Klein project, which I think is going to be nice, the extension or additions to Canal Side, which should be nice. But we keep hearing when we argue about height restrictions and all that we need taller buildings because there's a limit, so much limited space in the Vista. It just seems to me as a resident that this is just not the best use of that property. And like they were saying, this kind of, I know, kind of separates Canal Side and that area from further up the Vista. It's at the entrance to the city. And I'd just like to add my voice to the voices that think this is not the best use for that property. Thanks.
Thank you. Is there anyone else?
Hi, my name's Gordon Langston, and I agree with I'm a resident of the Vista also, and would prefer not to see this kind of property being used for these types of things. We need more tax-bearing type properties in that area.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Elizabeth Trinbeth. My mom owns the property, the little house there that was on, could you go to that other picture that's blank? And we feel that just boxes us in. She's not in agreement with the choice of development. She's a visionary. She built in the 1980s in Lexington when nothing was going there. So she really bought this property with faith that it would be developed with beautification.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Bart Walrath. I'm a resident of the Vista and a member of the Vista Neighborhood Association New Development Committee. I agree with just about everything that was said opposing this. It's just, to me, it is a gateway to the Vista with premier Klein Steel and hopefully the SCE&G, or the old SCE&G bus maintenance site being another prime development. And I just can't understand lowering a zoning change to lower the requirements to put in a self-storage facility. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Dan D'Alberto. I'm an attorney in town, and I work with Mr. Tomlin and Mr. Heiler. Just a couple of points I wanted to make very briefly. One is that this specific zoning change, we had met with city staff several months ago about the best way to handle the zoning change to accomplish what we wanted to accomplish on this site after an exhaustive review of what should be put there. This specific zoning change was recommended by city staff as opposed to any of the other mechanisms we were considering at the time. Secondly, wanted to let everybody know that there appears to be some concern about the tax associated with this site. Well, obviously, we're going to be paying full taxes. We approximate that this facility will cost between $8 and $9 million to construct, and we'll obviously be paying full city taxes at the full rate, regardless of what that amount is. And so there's no issue associated with that. Finally, I wanted to discuss the issue associated with Canalside and its connection. We began meeting with Canalside and the owners, the beach company in Charleston, several months ago to cooperate with them on this site, because realizing as they're the main neighboring landowner, they were going to be concerned about it. They actually appreciate the connection to this site, consider it an amenity, and feel that this is a strong use for a neighboring piece of land. The concern about the parking is the final thing that I'll mention, is that this site is oddly shaped, as you can see, but storage does not require a lot of parking. As you might imagine, people come, people drop stuff off, people leave. People come, people drop stuff off, people leave. People are there for maybe half an hour maximum. And so the parking load, although there might be 500 units, there might be 30 cars a day maximum that use this facility. And so the parking load, and therefore the traffic load that's added to an already strangled parcel, is going to be very minimal.
Thank you. Any other questions? Well, is there anyone else? I don't want to leave anyone out.
My name's Maria Walrath, and I am a resident of the Vista, and I have nothing more to add other than what has been discussed in opposition to this project, but I just wanted to add my voice. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? Any questions to staff?
I don't have any questions for staff. I do have a couple of comments. I hear everybody's concern about, I guess, the potential use for the property, or this use in the Vista area. And, 15 years ago, I see Mr. Doak back there, we were begging people to come to the Vista and live. And based on new projections, which I think are out, we may have up to 10,000 people living in downtown Columbia in the next 5 years. I think the project we just approved a few months ago for the Old Klein site is 300 units in and of itself, and I think there's several more projects that are on the way. All that's great. I mean, the momentum in the Vista, I never would have thought is expanding, and we're really truly becoming an urban city. I do think that this actually presents an opportunity as opposed to something else, because ultimately with all these people that are moving downtown, we're going to have services for people. They're not going to move downtown and have to drive 10 minutes outside of town to go to their storage unit or to go get gas or to, all these things that are not as high quality as a loft hotel. But in order to continue to attract people downtown, I do think that we're going to have to provide these types of services somewhere. This particular property, I'm in the commercial real estate business. Sometimes that's good, sometimes it's bad, but I ride by this property a lot, and I can tell you that the DOT is going to have issues with the access and where it is, and that's going to limit the developability of the property into a significantly high-density area. And I think that this actually presents an opportunity to bring in a use and make it an example of how we can take a use that's not historically in the Vista and may not be something that's ideal, but we can create something that's architecturally compatible that's going to be well received within the Vista community. So that's my thoughts.
I'd like to add a couple comments myself. I actually have an office in the Vista, and I can appreciate what everyone's saying here tonight. But We could have gotten a fast food restaurant. We could have gotten a lot of things there. And until I saw the design tonight, I really think they've done, I will commend you guys for, it's very nicely done. It will be a very nice facility. And I also, as Mr. Waits has said, you can't have all these people down in the Vista, and you can't have the services to go along with it. So I think staff's done a good job in looking at this. I don't know how everyone else feels, obviously, but I commend all of you for all your opinions. Are there any other questions for staff?
Yeah, I think just real quick, looking at it, its current zoning of C1 seems to me to be a sort of not very intense zoning for a parcel like this located in such an urban area. How does that align with the, what is our land use classification? UCAC3. Would the future zoning maps potentially put a more intense zoning classification on a property like this than a C1?
Is that the new ones?
Yeah. Because I see limited things that could go there with the current C1 zoning.
I would say that, your C1 is a very kind of low density, very limited collection of uses within that particular district. And I think as we're, going into the new year and we start to work on our zoning code and we start to have more input, I think you'll find this, the C1 is one of those things that typically it's used adjacent to more residential areas, and when you're trying to make that transition. In this particular location, it goes, the C1 does go back to the 70s. I'd have to really dig into the weeds to figure out what the thought was, why we have this C1 through this area. We do have the two office buildings that are just purely office buildings to the north, the Aflac and the other building. But, as you can see on that zoning map, there's a whole scattering of everything from M2, which is our heavy industrial. We got M1, light industrial. We have the C1. We have the PUD. We have another PUD. So the whole downtown, it does have a scattering. So I would anticipate throughout our zoning process, both in the writing and the mapping of it, that lots of parts of downtown are going to be explored and looked at in terms of what's appropriate going into the future.
Well, I think that certainly limits the possibilities for the future as it currently stands.
Any further discussion or questions?
I'm just going to add too that this is, it's a PUD, but it's also in the DD, so it would have to, the site plan and the architecture would have to go through DDRC, so just for whatever it's worth, just so that everybody knows that.
All right, can I have a motion, please?
I'd like to make a motion that we approve and go along with staff's recommendation to rezone the parcel from C1 DD to PUD DD.
Is there a second?
A second.
Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Motion's approved. Our next item.
The next item is 801, 805, 809, 813, and 817 Sunset Drive. It is for rezoning from a PUD R to RG1, General Residential District. The summary of this application is located within your staff summary in terms of when the original PUD was approved back in '07, as well as what has occurred on the property currently. And the staff recommendation is to, we are recommending denial of this particular application. And Mr. Cook can probably add a few things too if you have questions.
Is the applicant?
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and Commission members and staff. My name is Torrey Johnson. I represent the proposed owners for this particular project. And during our due diligence to turn this into a small multifamily development, we did our due diligence, and according to our information, that we could rezone this into a RG1, but we did not have the information from the comprehensive plan. So I understand with the comprehensive plan, it is now, I guess, designated a UCR2, and that gives us the, it will not allow us to do what we currently have. So we're not here to try to get it to be zoned to RG1, but looking to staff and commission members for recommendations for the type of development we're trying to do, which is a very small multifamily development in this area. So currently we had, I believe it was 3 buildings, each having 4, let me go back to my notes. We had 3 buildings that had 4 bedrooms each, and I think 1 bedroom that had 3. So currently, I think there are 5 lots, and we're going to combine them all into one parcel so that we can do this development. But currently, we're just right now looking to staff and to the commission for recommendations to use it within the current UCR2 designation.
Any questions for the applicant?
So it's currently single-family residential? The use is?
Is that right?
It's a-
No, it's not. It's
It's vacant.
PUD.
The property is vacant. It's zoned PUDR. It was an old kind of defunct plan unit development that was required to rehab some existing buildings and use them as such. They've been removed from the property, many, many years ago. So at this point, like I said, it's just kind of a plan unit development, just kind of in purgatory.
So the staff is recommending denying this, am I correct?
Yes, the staff has looked at it in conjunction with the comprehensive plan and the surrounding zoning, both north and south of the site. And when you actually look at what the vision is for the particular neighborhood in terms of basically being single-family homes with large rear yards and some front yards, typically around 2,000 square feet, staff was just concerned that the scale of this particular development is going to be different than all of the surrounding development. 11 one-bedroom units on this particular stretch would be different than what you see in each direction.
Okay.
What I'd like to add is that we're not tied to what we're trying to do now. We're trying to get a feel for what we can do in this area. As you can see, there are 5 individual lots. So if it's, we're able to put in 5 individual units to, gain the capacity that we need instead of trying to do it within 11 units within, let's say, 4 particular units, then we're fine with that, but we're just trying to get a gauge from the body here to see what we can do moving forward for this development.
Didn't the PUD already outline, the PUD-R outline what can be done with it?
It's a very specific PUD. It was an old PUD. It says they had to use the existing buildings to rehab them. The existing buildings are gone now. So it was, like I said, kind of an outdated PUD that it needs to be rezoned to something other than what it currently is zoned. Perhaps a lower density residential zoning would be more appropriate. And we certainly would be glad to sit down with anyone and talk to them about the options that are available in another zoning category, perhaps.
For instance, in the RG1, just to the north of this particular area, those 3 houses are essentially a duplex that have one entrance on the side and one entrance to the front. So they look and they're kind of a ranch style. They're very similar to the ranch houses across the street, but if you drive down it, you just kind of have to go slow to actually realize, oh, those are actually duplexes in terms of that. So, I mean, there are different typologies within the neighborhood. they're on sort of the larger lot concept.
And you were planning to do one facility with 11 one-bedroom units?
4 facilities.
Four
Yes.
facilities.
Yes.
Would, I think this commission in a whole has certainly tried, as Rick has said many times, to protect our neighborhoods, and that's what we like to do. But would, certainly hearing that you need to do something because it's tied to an old PUD with existing buildings, would you be agreeable to having discussions with staff to look at a proposed zoning that's more in keeping with the surrounding neighborhood?
Definitely, because we've talked with staff in the past to try to get a gauge for what can be done. And after the initial conversation, we went ahead and did this. But like I said before, we didn't have the comprehensive plan in front of us, which prohibited us from doing what we're trying to do initially now.
This is just such an old neighborhood, and I'm really surprised we don't have any homeowners here because they have such an active homeowners association, and I just have a hard time believing this.
I wonder if we should defer this to give you the time to meet with staff and then represent it.
But we have a very specific request on the table today, and that's to rezone this to an RG1. And I think we should rule on the existing request and allow, allow the applicant to bring it back in the future as a different rezoning request, rather than defer it.
Yeah, but I think I heard, and maybe I misheard, were you gonna withdraw the request, though?
If that's to our best interest, then yes, we can withdraw the request. And that's why I'm leaning to commission members and staff to determine how we move forward from this point.
If you're just looking for sort of opinions, I mean, the vast bulk of the property around there is single-family residential.
Right.
And I guess, personally, I would prefer to see these properties developed in a consistent manner with the neighboring properties, not sort of a lot of units shoehorned onto a small lot.
One option that would be reasonable would be, like Mr. McDuffie said, to take a vote and vote it up or down to kind of get that cleared. If the applicant is wanting to just find a product that'll work on another zoning, perhaps a zoning that would be more compatible in staff's opinion, RS residential type zoning, we certainly can sit down and chat with the applicant about that. If he does move forward and is denied today on the RG1 request, of course it will go forward to City Council with the Planning Commission's recommendations. So he'll be tied up with that for a while. You certainly can at any point, if he decides to move forward and gets denied, apply for another zoning request other than RG1. But he could not come back if he were to be denied by council with this RG1 request now. He couldn't come back with the same request in a year. So if I'm hearing, and correct me if you're wrong, you would like to meet with staff to discuss some options that would work with the existing lots that are there. And there are zoning districts that I think staff would support other than this RG1 district that may not be exactly what you had intended originally, but it certainly would be a zoning district where you could get some perhaps single-family residential units on the existing lots. But that's certainly up to you, and we're available anytime to talk with you about that after this meeting, of course.
Will it only be, well, my question is, will it only be for single family, or can we do something like they have in the RG1 that's right up adjacent to it, where we can have like a duplex or maybe a quadplex that actually looks like a single family residence? Because in the notes that I have with your comprehensive plan, the primary use is single family detached, but there are also secondary types, which includes small multifamily as well.
What I would suggest, as Mr. Cook has stated, it would probably be best to withdraw your request tonight and meet with staff and then represent it.
Okay.
Because once we vote on it, it goes to City Council.
The RG1 is presently there, and I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to ride by and take a look at that. What's on those lots right now?
There's duplexes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
They're
Yeah.
ranch-style duplexes, probably. They're vintage with the rest of the neighborhood. I'm guessing somewhere post-war, 50, 60, in that age range.
So those are the ones that say if you rode by and looked at it, they appear to be, would seem to be single-family.
If you just drove by, you probably wouldn't notice that they were a duplex. You have to kind of slow down because the way that you don't actually see the two doors exactly, you have to kind of have to look at them.
Kind of follow up on one of the questions that was tossed out earlier about whether you could do attached one-family units. If you're looking to do attached one-family units, you basically would need an RG or higher zoning designation. Generally, your RS zoning category would cover your detached one-family. And again, there's nothing to say that the applicant could withdraw this application today or this request today and apply next month or tomorrow for that matter after we had time to discuss it. So it's totally up to you. But once if you do move forward and the commission makes a recommendation, it'll move forward to city council for ultimately city council will make a determination on the request. But again, our staff is available tomorrow if you'd like to meet and talk about it at your convenience.
Okay. Well, just listening to the staff recommendation, then we'll just go ahead and withdraw our application for at this time until further review with staff.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. McDuffie needs to be excused for a meeting he must be at as well. Is that, that's okay. Item number 10.
Item number 10 is an amendment to 17404E4 to define how residential spacing requirements to measure for the conversion of outdoor advertising signs to changeable copy adjacent to the interstate. And I'm going to let Brian describe this because he knows it more intimately than I do.
Please. You can do it if you want.
Try.
I'm going to try. Basically, we're dealing in this particular section, 17404E4, with the spacing requirements from a residential zone district when you convert an outdoor advertising sign to changeable copy adjacent to a highway. So think billboard alongside the interstate, any interstate. Normally, when you convert a static or fixed display surface area of a legal non-conforming outdoor advertising sign to change the copy, basically went from a static billboard to digital billboard, the sign has to be located at least 300 feet from any residential zoning district, including property zone PUD R. So the way that that would be measured would be from zoning district boundary line as opposed to property line. So for example, if you're on one side of I-77 and you're in a, let's just say a heavy industrial zoning district, but across the interstate is a RSL, RS1 zoning district. That RS1 boundary would go basically to the center line of the interstate because basically the ordinance talks about when you have two adjacent zoning districts, you measure to the center line of the road or in this state, the interstate. So you would measure that 300 feet from that billboard to the residential zoning boundary, which would be the center of the interstate. So what this is saying and what staff is asking for today is to permit the 300-foot measurement to extend to the residential parcel line instead of the interstate center line. So that same example that I gave when you have on I-77 industrial on one side where your billboard is, you would measure all the way across the interstate until you hit the residential parcel line or your property line in essence of the residential zone property as opposed to measuring to the center line of the interstate. Now, I know that's confusing, but just think of, residential on one side, commercial on one side. They're going to meet in the middle of the interstate, and that's where you take your measurement from one side to the center as opposed to one side to the other side of the interstate until you hit the property line. So if I totally confused everybody else.
I just got one question. So is this going to allow for more signs, or is this just going to allow for static signs to be converted to changeable signs?
It's dealing specifically with a certain section of our ordinance, again, 17404E4, which talks about conversion of a billboard to a static
From a
billboard
static.
to a digital.
To a
correct.
digital.
Right, and that's what that would cover.
So this wouldn't allow for any more signs than we already have. It would just allow the conversion of some signs to digital signs.
That's correct.
Any other questions to staff? Is there anyone here? This is a staff question. All right. Can we get a motion?
I'd like to make a motion. I'd like to make a motion to recommend approval of the amendment of how we define the residential spacing requirement measured for the conversion of outdoor advertising signs to changeable copy adjacent to interstate highway.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? We recommend number 10.
Thank you.
Number 11's been deferred. So we're down to other business.
12 and 13. So item number 12, we actually, just like the Planning Commission meeting in October where we had to move it to November, we actually had to move our public space, public life analysis because we were scheduled that shortly after what we had was the flood. And so we're going to be actually doing that this Thursday and Saturday as well as Friday. Thursday and Friday, we actually have 4-hour blocks with volunteers who are going to be counting people, diagramming what people are doing in various public spaces. We were hoping to do 10 spaces within the city. I am still in need of volunteers, so we may be only doing 8 spaces. So I would encourage any of you or anyone at your office or your neighbor, please contact me. I'll get you the link to sign up, but I am looking for volunteers. It's a 4-hour block. I think you'll find it really quite interesting. If you've never actually sat in a spot or walked around a spot and actually saw how people use it, I can guarantee you'll be quite interested.
What's a spot, John?
A spot, a location. So one of them, it could be, some of the locations are going to be like Lincoln Street in the Vista. We're going to be also looking at an area over by Dollar More. We're going to be looking at areas on Main Street, over by Boyd Plaza. So public spaces, they may be a road, they may be a plaza, they may be a square or a park here in downtown. So they're all in the downtown area. And then on Friday, if you happen to see myself or Lucinda Statler or some other two people from the consulting firm, we're going to have pop-up stations throughout the city, trying to engage people, getting comments and things like that. So we will randomly, I can't tell you where we're going to be at what time. It's going to be a little bit random, but we may be at the Vista for an hour and then on Main Street for an hour and back some other place and over by USC. And so if you see us around, stop by. But that's what's going to happen also on Friday.
All right. We're back at City Council next month.
We should be back at City Council next month in its council chambers, unless for some reason they decide to have another special meeting. But I don't anticipate that. So.
All right. Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Meeting's adjourned.